If you're desperate in your life for breakthrough, maybe you've struggled in the area of your thoughts or your emotions or your habits. Maybe you've struggled this last year with anxiety or with anger or with some sort of addiction, and these are just the A's. There's so much in this life that can trip us up. Well, I think you're going to enjoy not only today's lesson, but this whole 5-week series, because we're going to talk about what we call breakthrough disciplines. This is the ancient secret of what Jesus called life to the full. And the secret isn't medication or therapy, even though those things aren't bad. The secret is what we call in the Christian world spiritual disciplines. So let's start with a definition. A spiritual discipline is a purposeful habit that eventually makes you more like Jesus. Now, think about this in your everyday life. A purposeful habit you might have is running every day or working out or doing your homework or whatever it is. Well, a spiritual discipline is a purposeful spiritual habit that has the purpose not just of making you smarter or making you more fit. A spiritual discipline has the purpose of making you more like Jesus. Take a look at this passage from John 15, verse 5. Jesus said, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing." This is a great verse that I think explains what we're going to be looking at in this entire series, that as we practice these spiritual disciplines, we stay more and more connected to Jesus, and the more connected to Jesus we are, the more we look like Jesus, the more we act like Jesus. Look at this list from Galatians chapter 5. The Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, if you think about it, every one of these things is what Jesus perfectly embodied every day that he walked this earth. But what about you? Do you perfectly live these values out? Do you perfectly live according to this fruit? Well, the answer is no. We could all use more love. We could all use more joy or peace or patience or kindness. And the secret to living this kind of stuff out more and more in your life is to be more connected to Jesus through, again, what we call these spiritual disciplines. Even Jesus practiced many of these spiritual habits. Let's take a look at a few of them: Bible study and prayer and connection and giving and mentoring. Those are the big 5. But there's so many more, like fasting and meditation and solitude and journaling and slowing down in your everyday life, and frugality or abstinence or silence or secrecy, celebration. Now, this is just a partial listing of spiritual habits. There are many, many more. But in this series, we're going to unpack several of these spiritual disciplines so that you can start wrapping your mind around it. But more than anything, the goal in this series isn't that this is a study of the spiritual disciplines. This isn't some academic exercise. Really, the goal is, as we start sharing some of these disciplines with you, it's that you would start implementing them in your life, that you would start practicing them. And listen, here's what I want you to know. If you would practice some of these spiritual disciplines, maybe for some of you, you've never even thought about this before, but if you would start practicing some of these spiritual disciplines, you will begin to experience breakthrough in your life. Now, a warning about spiritual disciplines: they aren't about earning God's favor. The intention isn't to get something from God, but to experience the fullness of life that comes from Jesus. So we're not trying to look more religious or check a bunch of boxes in our lives. That actually is not the goal of the spiritual disciplines. We're not trying to get God to owe us something because of how disciplined we are. In fact, take a look at how Paul talked about it in Philippians chapter 3. He said, "I once thought these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Jesus Christ, my Lord." Now, Paul is talking here about following the law, and it's easy for us as we start this study of the spiritual disciplines, it's easy for us to sort of take our eye off the ball and make these spiritual disciplines about the spiritual disciplines, or we start patting ourselves on the back and we start feeling really good, or on the other hand, we start feeling really bad if we're pretty bad at these things. That's not what the point is at all. Paul himself used to be a Pharisee, a super religious person, and then he met Jesus and he said all these things. And I would say that even spiritual disciplines, because it can just become religiosity if we're not careful, all these things, if we put them in the wrong place, then I think we're missing the point. The point is we can become more and more like Jesus. Let's remember that as we go through these disciplines. The secret to breakthrough is a lifestyle of preparation, not a momentary effort. Spiritual disciplines help us to retrain our automatic responses to everyday life. Here's a great quote from the book, The Spirit of the Disciplines by Dallas Willard. He says, "The star performer himself in sports didn't achieve his excellence by trying to behave in a certain way only during the game." Look what he says. "Instead, he chose an overall life of preparation of mind and body to provide a foundation for his conscious efforts during the game." And that's a great metaphor for what we're doing with the spiritual disciplines. The spiritual disciplines are practice. They are a part of our lifestyle of preparation. So when we are in the moment of anxiety or anger or fighting an addiction, that we don't just rely on our willpower in the moment, but instead our preparation, our lifestyle of being connected into the vine can eventually help us to bear the fruit that Jesus wants us to bear in our lives. I love how Paul talked about it to his protege, Timothy. He said, "Do not waste time arguing over godless ideas and old wives' tales." He says, "Instead, train yourself to be godly." Physical training is good, but training for godliness is much better, promising benefits in this life and in the life to come. And spiritual disciplines are part of training for godliness. So if you've never even considered them, I think that this whole series can be revolutionary for your own spiritual walk. And one last verse I want you to be aware of, Colossians 3, verses 5 and 10. Paul says, "So put to death the sinful, earthly things lurking within you. Put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him." This sums up what we do with the spiritual disciplines. We're putting to death those old ingrained habits in our old nature, and we're putting on our new nature. We're being renewed as we learn to know Jesus, as we learn to become like Him in the disciplines. And when we do that, we can really experience breakthrough in our everyday lives.